So today, in going through the Bible, book by book and chapter by chapter, in the New Testament, we're going to be in Ephesians chapter 5. Some pretty interesting things here. It starts off in Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 1 by telling us that we need to be imitators of God. Talk about something that's hard to do. It says, therefore, be imitators of God as loved children. Now, this is exactly what we want our children to do. We want our children to look at us, to love us, and desire to be like us, assuming that we're trying to be the kind of person we ought to be. We want to teach our children what they need to know and how they need to act in order to be successful in this life. Well, God has done the same thing for us, except for our spiritual lives and for a life that is going to last an eternity in heaven with Him. He has shown us, specifically through His Son, Jesus Christ, exactly who we need to be and how we need to behave, what we need to be saying, what we need to be doing, so that we can be like Him. And now, if we really love God, if we really truly desire God, we're not going to get into religion or Christianity or anything like that to please me, to make myself happy. I'm going to be looking how I can make God happy, how I can please God. I am going to desire to be like the one that I love because He has done so much for me. And so this absolutely makes sense. Therefore is the concluding word. Because God has done all this other stuff that we talked about in chapter 4, therefore you need to be like God. And He's going to say that there's certain types of things that we have to avoid. He says coarse and foolish talk and crude joking are not suitable as some of the things. So dirty jokes, coarse talk, just rough speech, not even necessarily a dirty joke, but just talking about things that are inappropriate, that shouldn't happen amongst people who are trying to be like God. He's also going to say sexual immorality and any impurity or greed should not even be heard of among you, as is proper for saints. Now that's an important word, saints. It doesn't mean like, St. Patrick or St. Michael or anything like that. It means somebody who is holy, who is set aside, set apart, specially for God. So if you are dedicating your life to God, if you decide, I want to be a Christian, I want to serve the Lord Jesus Christ, I want to make my life something special and set apart for God, that is what makes you a saint. When God makes you holy and sets you aside as being part of His children, you're a saint. So if we're going to be saints, we can't have sexual immorality or any impurity. That's pretty tough to talk about. Anything that's impure. Now, does that mean that if there's a slight impurity in my life on the day of judgment, it's going to put me in the bad place? Not necessarily. And that's a separate discussion altogether. But what it does mean is I need to be striving to get those things out of my life. Rather than being happy with who I am today, I need to be striving to become better for God tomorrow. That's the goal here, because we want to be imitators of God. We want to become more like Him tomorrow. Well, there's no impurity in God. There's no sexual immorality with God. There's no greed. There's nothing corruptible. There's no coarse jesting in God. And so I want to become like that, like my Father. And then He's going to go on to say, in the rest of this chapter, He's going to show us what it looks like to be searching and seeking after the Father. He's going to say, pay careful attention then to how you walk in verse 15. So in other words, you have to go throughout your daily life looking at what you're doing, the choices you're making, the choices you're not making, and you need to examine your daily walk with God and say, am I living a life that is an imitation of God? Am I living to be like God? He says, not as unwise people, but as wise, making the most of the time because the days are evil. So don't be foolish, but understand what the Lord's will is. Now remember, in chapter 4, He just told us that He's given us apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers so that all the saints can be equipped for the work of ministry, so that all the saints can grow up into the fullness of the stature of Christ. So now He says, don't be foolish, walk in wisdom. Understand what the Lord's will is. How do we do that? How do we understand what God's will is? There's a simple tool that you can get just about anywhere. In fact, you can get it if you have an internet connection for free. It's called the Bible. Open it up, read what God is telling us. He's told us these things through the apostles and prophets, and He's told us everything we need to know. Peter would say in 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 3, that everything that pertains to living a godly life, He has shown us or given us through the knowledge of His Son, Jesus Christ. So if we look through the Scriptures, we can find what God's will is for our lives. And we need to be wise in that regard, not foolish. We need to look for what God's will is, live according to God's will, and then imitate God in every aspect of our daily life. And as we're going through the Bible book by book and chapter by chapter, that's Ephesians chapter 5.